All right. Thank you guys. It's such a joy and honor to be here with you today. And man, I am at Real Life Church, which excites me. It fires me up. I want to say a huge shout out not only to the Valencia campus, but also to Kangen Country. Thank you guys for being part of the Real Life family, being with us today. And man, I love this church. I love your pastor, Rusty. I've known him for over 20 years, so ask me later. I can tell you stories. But it's just been amazing to watch God move through him and through this faith community over the years, the incredible impact that you're having. We're inspired by you in Las Vegas, where I serve as a pastor at Central Church, and we're learning from you, and we're grateful for you and your testimony and witness to the goodness and the love of God in Jesus Christ. So it is an honor to be with you, and I thank you for letting me share for a few moments together. Now, I do bring you greetings from Las Vegas. There are Christians and pastors in Las Vegas. We should probably just start there. It's just like anywhere else most of the time, except for when it's not. When my kids were little, we pulled up to a stop sign once. My wife and I were sitting there, and my son Ethan was in the back seat. He was probably 6 or 7 years old, and there was a billboard, and it was the backsides of a lot of women in bikini bottoms, and it said, "The hits are back" on the billboard. And my son says to his little sister, just as innocently as he possibly could, he said, "Emma, which naked girl is your favorite? Mine's the one with brown hair." And there's that moment as a parent, right? All the oxygen sucked out of the minivan immediately. And I'm sitting at the wheel like, what have we done to our children? You know, and my wife turned around and she says, "Ethan, we do not have favorite naked girls." Which I'm like, no, but we do have naked girls, and they're right here, you know, so we got to deal with this. But we love it. It's just like anywhere else for the most part. And we're there because we are on a mission to share the goodness and the love and the mercy and the grace of God in Jesus Christ with people. All kinds of people. Healthy people, sick people. People who have it together, people who don't have it together. People who are broken and messed up, and people who aren't broken and messed up, at least in their own mind, but they actually are broken and messed up. We're there on a mission, and so we're honored to be there. And I know you're on that mission here as well, making a difference in people's lives. I'm one of those individuals that just loves the church. I love what the church accomplishes together. It's one of the reasons I was so excited about Pastor Rusty's new book, Better Together. I absolutely loved it, wrote the foreword for it. I'm so excited about it because his book really captures, I think, God's heart for community and for what happens in community. And I love the church and the church community so much because the church saved my life. I mean, God saved my life, but he used the people of the church to do it. And so for me, when I was 17 years old, I sort of grew up around the church. My parents would take me to church, and they would make me go. And so we would walk in together, and they would go to the adult services. And in the church that I was in Amarillo, Texas, they would say that I could go to the youth services, and then we would kind of meet up afterwards, you know. And so I would basically walk through the church out the other side. I would walk into the alleys. These are things that we have in Texas, you know, where they're behind houses. It's hard to understand. But we had these alleys. I would walk around the alleys, and I would smoke cigarettes, and I would wait for church to be over, and then I would meet my parents back up at the car. And my mom would say, "How was church?" And I'd say, "It was great. Every weekend, same thing. It was great." "What'd you learn about?" "I learned about Jesus." Right, which is the most basic church answer a person can possibly give. You know, like you can't go wrong with Jesus when it comes to church. But my mom, it was always like enough for her. She was like, good. I think deep down she knew something was really wrong. What's funny is later, you know, when I was a father and my son was coming home from church one day, I said, "Son, what did you learn in church?" He said, "Well, I learned about Jesus." I'm like, "Get over here and sit down. That is not going to work in this house." I'm like, "You don't scam a scammer, man. We're gonna have a conversation here, you and I." And so, I'm like, I want details. I want Bible verses. You know, I want to know exactly what you heard, what you learned. But so I sort of grew up around the church, but I didn't really take it serious, and I didn't understand why people went and why they showed up. I didn't get it, and I got caught up, you know, with the older group of kids, and got caught up in the party scene in high school, junior high, and then going into high school, and one thing led to another, and you know, before I knew it, I was really tangled up in a 4-year drug addiction. And I can't really remember much of what happened in those years, but I still remember that day when I was 17 years old, standing in the church parking lot, and I had come to a crossroads. Some of you have been to this crossroads in your life. I knew that I was either going to get help, or I was going to either die, go crazy, or go to jail. And in the end, that's where addiction always leads. I mean, there's only one road as addiction grows deeper and deeper in a person's life. And that road eventually either ends in insanity, incarceration, death, or you get help. And so I got to that place where I knew like something had to change. And I remember at 17, I decided to walk across that church parking lot and walk through those doors on my own terms, if you will, for the first time. And I found my way to a little group of people that had a Bible study in that church community. Everyday people, normal people. We were kind of the oddballs, honestly, from all different walks of life. And those people became my life-saving community. They walked with me, they prayed with me. And listen, it didn't matter if they were cool or not cool. It didn't matter if they had it all together or they didn't have it all together. What mattered is they loved me, they didn't judge me, they didn't condemn me. They just accepted me where I was and walked with me in my relationship with God as I began to grow and mature. That's what people so desperately need. They need to see our faith, and through seeing our faith, be inspired by our love and acceptance of them to move closer to Jesus and His Word and an understanding in their heart. So the church did that for me. And I look back now, and it's been, in fact, I carry in my pocket every day, even to this day. I didn't always do it, but I started doing it again a couple years ago. I carry a Celebrate Recovery chip in my pocket. This is my 29-year chip. So that was 29 years ago that God rescued me and restored me. You say, well, Jud, that was like 29 years ago. You were 17 years old. Why do you carry your chip in your pocket today? And I'll tell you why I do it. Thank you for asking. I do it because it reminds me of a lot of things. First of all, it reminds me where I come from. There's nothing more dangerous than a follower of Jesus who's forgotten all that God has done in his life or her life. That was the problem with the religious leaders and the Pharisees, where I felt like they lost the heart of the gospel, why Jesus had some of his harshest criticisms for them. There's nothing more dangerous than a follower of Jesus who's forgotten all that God has done in their heart and in their life. And the result of that is you become arrogant and proud and judgmental rather than compassionate to other people, because you forget where you were in that situation. And so I carry it as a reminder of all God has done in my life. It reminds me that I'm no better than anybody else. It reminds me that I need God's grace in Jesus Christ and his forgiveness and mercy every single day, not just for salvation, but also for every day in my life. It reminds me that when I'm frustrated with other people and I start to think other people can't change, that there were people who were frustrated with me and they thought I would never change, and look what God did. God can always do a miracle in somebody's life. Keep praying for them. Don't give up on them. It reminds me when I'm angry at other people because they do not change, to be patient and to remember all those who've been patient with me. That's why I carry this chip in my pocket every day. And it's kind of a nuisance. It rattles around. It's not cool, like it gets in the way. It goes off in the airport, and I'm like, oh yeah, I got my security. Oh, that's my Celebrate Recovery chip. Got to get that out. But I carry it as a reminder of what God has done. And so I love the church. I love what God's doing through your church. And I love what God does in the church. And some people get cynical of the church. Some people can get critical of the church. And my mother used to always say the church would be a perfect place if there weren't any people in it. All right? People are the problem, but people can also be the solution. The church isn't perfect. I know that. Some churches hit scandals and hit the newspapers and all that, and we read about that. But I always think it's funny that we hold up a few churches that made big blowouts and mistakes, and we don't look at the hundreds of thousands of churches that God is using all around our country and around the world to bring life change and to work in people's hearts and in their lives. I love the church. I love what God does in the church, and I want to talk to you today about the healing power of the church for all of us in our lives. There is a way I think we can heal. Whether we come from addiction or whether we just come from a stable family and stable background, whether we come from abuse and loss, whether we've been through breakup or divorce, whether our family's going through crisis or tragedy, or whether things are calm and good, there is a way that we can heal, and the way we can heal is together through faith, walking on the road of community. And so I want to talk to you about how we can do that. And I want to share with you this simple idea that God has brought you through it, whatever it is in your life, so that you can help others get through it. Don't bury what God has brought you through. Don't bury what God has brought you through. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 3. He says, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Look at this. God is our merciful Father and the source of all what? Comfort. The source of all comfort. He comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. You see that? So there is a cycle to comfort. God comforts us. God heals us in our lives so that we can comfort others. And God first is the source of all comfort in Jesus Christ. So God wants to bring comfort and healing and restoration in us, in our lives, as we follow him. And then over time, he's going to use us in our story to bring comfort and healing and restoration into the lives of others. That's the power of community. So one of the ways that we can get the most out of community together and find healing together is to lean into God's comfort together. To lean into God's comfort together. The Bible says he's the source of all comfort. Remember a while back I was walking in a mall area with a friend of mine, and he did something I've never seen anybody do either before or since. We're walking along and he's talking to me, and he's actually mid-word with no warning, no kind of, hey, this might be happening, nothing. Mid-word, he just threw up. I mean, he didn't even like drop his head. He just threw up. I never seen anything like this. We're just walking along, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, you're throwing up. So he threw up, and then he threw up again, and we just sort of kept walking, because I don't know what you do in that moment. It's like, well, okay, you just threw up. I said, are you okay? How you feel? He goes, I feel better. I didn't know you felt bad, but that's good to know, right? You feel better. Okay, awesome, right? So we walked about, 15 or 20 feet, and then I said, hey, there's a restroom back the other way, so maybe we should turn around and go back the other way. And we were in the flow of people. There were people all around us, and most people didn't even notice. It was like covert throwing up. It just sort of happened, and I'm a sympathetic vomiter anyway, so I'm like looking away like, hey. So we turn around now, and we're in the flow of people going back towards the scene of the crime. And the idea is we're going to get to the restroom so that, I can help my friend out in this moment. And so as soon as we turn around, I see it. This poor woman, she walks right into the middle of that mess, which I hadn't even thought about, right in the middle of the mess. And before we could even do anything, both feet go up and she goes right down on her backside. It was as bad as you can imagine in that moment. And I remember we're now moving towards this whole thing, watching it play out in slow motion. I remember she sits there and she holds her hand up and she goes, what's this? And I'm like, oh, you do not want to know what that is. And her friends immediately come up and begin to help her up. And about that time, we get up where we're sort of side by side. But nobody knows it was us because we're in the flow now of the other people. And they're in the flow of the people going this way. And her friends have already helped her up. And, I got a guy who could throw up again at any moment. And what's the point of going into a big conversation about it? So I just kind of like, God bless you guys. How you doing? She kept right on going. And then sure enough, about 20 feet the other way, he threw up again, and then again, and then again. And it was like I had a ticking time bomb on my hands. But I tell you that story because I feel like that story is a lot like life. A lot of times in life, you're just walking along. You're just minding your own business. You're just taking care of whatever you need to take care of. And then before you know it, you walk right into the middle of a mess, right? Both feet go up and you're right down in it and you're saying, what's this? How'd this get here? How'd I get in this situation? What did my business partner do? What did my boss do? What did my employee friend do? How did I find myself in this situation? What did our kids do? Sometimes somebody else did it. Sometimes we did it. But life is a mess. And what we need in those moments is to lean into the comfort of God together. We don't need somebody to come along and say, hey, you're a mess. It's not helpful, right? You need somebody to get a mop and help you clean up and help you get back on your feet. That's what the church community does. We lean into God's comfort together in our heart and in our lives. And so Paul says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning in verse 7, about the power of God. First of all, he talks about how God's power is within us, how this great power we have in our lives comes from God, the source of all comfort. I have a kid at church, he calls me Pastor Superman. Every time he sees me, he's like, Pastor Superman. I'm like, if that kid knew how unsuper I feel most of the time. Here's what Paul says. Paul says, our great power is from God, not from ourselves. Now look at this. He says, we are pressed on every side by troubles. So you can have God's power moving and working in your life. You can have God's Spirit moving and working in your life, and you can still be pressed on every side by troubles. Some of you are there right now. You're pressed with work troubles, marriage troubles, family troubles. You know, you're pressed with troubles at school, troubles, with your friends, troubles, related to hobbies or habits that go on in your life. And it feels like trouble is following you around everywhere. And Paul's saying, look, we're pressed on every side by troubles, but he says what? We are not crushed. You see, the difference that God's comfort can make, his power can make in our hearts and lives is not that we don't face troubles, it's that when we face them, we're not crushed by them. That's the difference. Then he goes on, he says, we're perplexed. Ever been perplexed? There's a lot of things that are perplexing in life. Sometimes we don't know what God's doing. Sometimes we don't understand what's happening. I can tell you, having walked through the mass shooting in Las Vegas with so many families this last October and journeying through that into this year, there's a lot that I don't understand, right? And there's a lot that I just don't get. While I don't have all the answers, I do believe God has all the answers. And my role is to walk with people because together is how we get through stuff. And we lean into God's comfort together. Paul says we're perplexed. There's a lot of things that are perplexing. I saw the Rolling Stones in concert, and it was very perplexing. I don't know if I got any Rolling Stones fans. You can admit that in church, right? We're in the West. It's okay. So anyway, this was just this last year. I saw them, and they came through Las Vegas, and a friend of mine had tickets. I'm like, yeah, the Rolling Stones, it's going to be awesome. So we go. And there's Mick Jagger, who's like 175 years old. And he's like aerobic and bone thin. Have anybody of you seen this guy? And he's like, he's kicking, and he's doing all these yoga moves, and I'm like blown away. I'm like, wow. But this was the moment for me, the most perplexing moment. I'm watching all this, and all of a sudden I look over, and there's Keith Richards. Now, I'm an amateur hobby hack guitarist, so I'm like, Keith Richards, man, and he's holding it down, dun, 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 dun. And all of a sudden, Keith Richards starts walking over, and he takes his guitar off, and I think he's going to hand his guitar and swap guitars out with his guitar tech, because everybody's looking at Mick Jagger, nobody's looking at Keith Richards, and he walks over, and all of a sudden, I'm not kidding, this guy holds up a cigarette. And backstage, he takes a big old drag off a cigarette, lets it off, puts his guitar back. I'm like, you are 150 years old and you are still smoking cigarettes. How are you breathing? You should be dead. And I'm going to the gym every day. I work out, I eat broccoli and salmon, and it's not going well for me. Anybody relate to this? Like, seriously. How are you alive, Keith Richards? We all want to know. There's a lot of things that are perplexing. Anyway, back to the Bible. Here's what Paul says. We are perplexed, but we are not driven to despair. That's the difference, right? God's Spirit, his power, his comfort and community. We may be perplexed, but we are not driven to despair. He says, we're hunted down. You ever been hunted down by creditors or bill collectors, people calling you, people coming after you? He says, we're hunted down, but we are never abandoned by God. The promise of God is that I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. We're never abandoned by God. He says, we get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. We may hit the ground, right? Remember Chawamanga? I can't remember the name of that band, but that song, what was it? Chumbawamba. Yeah. We get knocked down, but I get up again. I can't get down. Remember that? Yeah. It's okay. Pastor Rusty's not going to have me back. At this point, I'm completely off the rails. But Paul says, look, we're never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. That's the power of God's Spirit working within us. So 2 Corinthians, in the early chapter, he says, God is the source of all comfort, and he gives us this comfort so that we can comfort others. And then he goes on and gives like this practical example in his own life of all the times when he needs comfort, when he's been pressed on every side by troubles, when he's perplexed, when he's frustrated, when he's knocked down, but he's not destroyed. The measure of a person is never how many times they get knocked down. It's always how many times they get back up. And so, friends, I don't know what you're going through in your life. I don't know if it's perplexing, if there's troubles, if it's frustrating, if you feel like you're all alone. But what I want to celebrate with you is a couple things. One, you are in community. And that's the most powerful place you can be when you're hurting and alone. Because in community, when you can't carry your burdens by yourself, other people, your brothers and sisters in Christ, your friends that you meet in church can walk alongside you and carry that burden with you. When you feel like you're alone and abandoned, they'll remind you that God is still present and moving and working, and they will be the hands and feet of Jesus to you in sometimes your darkest hour. That's the power of one another. It's the power of community. And my encouragement to you is keep showing up. Keep showing up every week to community. If you're part of Celebrate Recovery, if you want to be part of a community that deals with hurts and habits and hangups, jump into Celebrate Recovery and be a part of what God is doing there every week. Let God move and work in your heart and life. If you're in a group, a life group, stay committed and connected with those individuals, because it's in community that we can lean in to God's encouragement in our own heart and in our own life. And then that empowers us to comfort others from our experience. Comfort others from your experience. I was working out at one point, and I was working out at this old YMCA. And I would go in, and this old YMCA, it was like all fluorescent lighting. It wasn't like one of these really cool new modern YMCAs. This was old school, you know, and it wasn't like there was TVs everywhere and all that. In the weight room, you could like hear the fluorescent lights, you know, right? And you know, you got weights around, and it's just grunt and dirty and nasty, and it just felt real. So I go in there, and there was always me and one other guy in this old YMCA. And the guy was really intimidating. I found out later at one point he had been a professional weightlifter, but he had gained some weight. But he was huge, and you know, I'm this, at the time, even more lanky, skinny guy. I got these, you know, little weights, you know, and let me just say, there's gym etiquette. You know, if you don't have much weight on the bar, don't make noises. I mean, come on. You know, the guy that's over there like, and there's nothing on it. Like, dude, that's the most embarrassing thing in the world. If you got real weight on there, you can do whatever you want. But anyway, he had real weight. And so he'd be like grunting and yelling and dropping this thing and turning around. I always felt like he was looking at me, and I'd look away like, hey, man. Just a pastor, man. Just trying to get my... Anyway, at one point, he's trying to max out on the bench press, and he yells out at me. He says, hey, can you spot me on the bench? And I sort of look behind myself like, hey, man, what's going on around here? Now, I don't know if you know how to spot somebody, but what he means is like you stand behind them, and so this guy, he's going to lay down on the mat or on the little table thing, and he's gonna. I'm obviously a intense weightlifter. He's gonna take the bar and get it up off the thing that it sits on. And then he's going to go down, do a bench press, and push it up, right? And I'm supposed to stand behind him, and I'm supposed to help guide the bar up so that it doesn't collapse on his chest, right, as he's doing a bench press. That's what it means to spot somebody. And yes, I barely knew what I was doing, and if it sounds like that, that's legitimate. So he said, can you spot me? There's nobody else around. I'm like, me? Okay, you know, so what do you say to a guy like that? I'm like, all right, yeah, you know. So I go over, and he goes, I'm just going to max out, just going to, you know, so if I get in trouble, just help me. I said, okay, yeah. So he goes down, he does one, he pushes it all the way up, no problem. He's doing number two, he gets it about halfway up, and he's sitting, I still see his face, I'm standing over him, he goes, little help here. I'm like, oh, okay. So I grabbed the bar, and I knew this much, that you're supposed to bend with your knees, keep your back straight, people. We're talking about a lot of weight on this bar, right? So I get down, I grab the thing with both hands, and I pull with everything I've got, and nothing happens. Like the bar does not move. And he says, a little help, and I pull, and it just does, it's not going anywhere. And I remember this moment, just sort of looking down at him, I'm like, that's all I got. I don't know what else to. He gives me this look, like I'm gonna kill you kind of look. And then he does this weightlifter thing that only professional weightlifters can really do, where all of a sudden he in a flash, like all of this happened in like 1.5 seconds. He slides to one side and he lets the bar drop in such a way that the bar hits the bench. When it hits the bench, all the weights on that side go off. And then, this is where a lot of people can break wrists and ribs and everything else. Then it flies the other way, and you gotta slide on your back in such a way that that bar will hit the bench on this side and all the weight comes off. I mean, anything else, he was gonna crush his chest. He had this huge weight on this bench press, right? So it was just like smash, smash, and then he stood up and he threw the bar across the room. And then he turned around and he looked at me. And I thought, this is it, man. I'm gonna die in a crappy, dirty YMCA with the fluorescent lights buzzing in the background. And he walked over to me and he goes, we're gonna work out together. That's what he said. And you know what I said? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we're gonna work out together. And that was the start of this amazing friendship. He said, meet me back here, such and such a time, because we were often there at the same time. So I started meeting him every day, and he started training me, and then I would help him. He showed me how to actually spot somebody, and that was good. But this guy worked me out like nobody I'd ever had work me out in my life. And when he found out I was a follower of Jesus, he wasn't really a follower of Jesus, and he thought that was kind of funny. So he would get me in a position where I'm like doing dips, and he would say, 7 is the perfect number in the Bible, so give me 7 more. I'm like, you don't know anything about the Bible. Would you Google this? He'd be like, there's 3 in the Trinity. I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about, But he'd say, if you really love Jesus, you'll give me 2 more. And then I felt like it was about my faith now and my testimony. And I'm like, all right, stand back, son. And I'm giving it everything I've got. And I shared my faith with this guy. I told him about what Jesus had done in my life, how through faith in him, I'd found a home, a family, a church community, how I'd been forgiven for my sins, how I'd been restored by his sacrificial death on the cross, how Jesus paid the penalty that I couldn't pay, and therefore I was able to live in a freedom that I didn't deserve. I shared all of that with him, and over time, he began to open his heart to what it was to be a follower of Jesus. And he began to open his heart to the good news of the gospel. And not only did he open his heart, I got in the best shape of my life. And that is the power of together, right? That only happens in community. I remember I go out to my car after working out. You ever had this moment? And I try to get my car keys out, but I couldn't lift my hands. Have you ever worked out so hard you can't lift your arm anymore? As I get older, it doesn't take much if I'm not ready, right? But I get my keys out and I'm like trying to get, right? Just to get the door open. And then you get, I remember at night, before I go to bed, I remember saying to my wife, Lori, I said, honey, can you brush my teeth? I can't do it. I'll stop at brush my teeth, but if you could just brush my teeth, that would be great. And so, yeah. But we need each other, and it's in community that God can do so much. So look again at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians in chapter 1, beginning in verse 4. He says, he comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. There is an end to it. Then he says, when we are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. When we're troubled, God can work through us to bring that comfort into the lives of others. We need each other. We're supposed to do it in community. So there is a cycle to healing. And I think God can heal us in our lives, but we're never so fully healed as when God not only heals us, but he uses us to bring healing into the lives of others. That's what completes that cycle. And then you realize your story has power. Some of you have survived some pretty horrible things in your life. Some of you have survived abuse. Some of you have survived loss. Some of you have survived chronic pain. Some of you have survived loved ones and family members who've walked out on you and left you. Some of you survived layoffs. Some of you have survived addiction. Some of you have survived any number of hardships and difficulties in your life. And I don't know why you went through those things in your life. And if I'm just being honest, there's lots of times when I don't understand and I just wish I could take all that away, and people don't have to go through all that they go through. But here's what I know. Having gone through what you've gone through, the reason God brought you through it is in part so that you can now help somebody else get through it. Don't bury what God brought you through. Let him use your story. Let him use your life. Let him make a difference through it. And so when you show up, it's not like you have to have all the answers in people's lives. People aren't looking for individuals to have all the answers. People are looking for genuine followers of Jesus who can simply say, me too. I was talking to a friend of mine recently. He was unpacking some heavy stuff in his heart and in his life, and I started giving him counseling, biblical passages. This is what you need. It's what the Bible says over here. It's the Bible says over here. I went to seminary. It's the Bible says over here. I know these passages. Boom, boom, boom. And it was like God's Spirit just sort of grabbed my heart in that moment and said, Jud, what are you doing? He doesn't need advice. He just needs a friend. And so even though I might have had the answers from a biblical standpoint to some of the things he was wrestling with, I think what God was impressing on my heart in that moment is just listen. And so I sat back and just started asking questions. And then I started sharing my story. Me too. I've been there in my own way. And as we began to journey out at the end, I just felt like God had done something significant in his life. And he said, I've never been able to talk about this stuff that I'm going through. You're the first person I've shared this stuff with. And he said, it feels so good to get it out. And he actually said these words. He said, the truth is, I don't really need you to say anything, because I know. I just need you to listen, and I thank you for doing that. And when he left, I was like, thank you, God, because I'm an idiot. And I was ready to give him a lot of advice that he didn't even need. Sometimes the most powerful thing that we can do relationally with one another is listen and love and have compassion. Remember all that God has done in our life and allow him to use our story to bring hope and healing to others. I don't know what you've been through. I had a friend a while back. She came to me and she said, Jud, when I was a teenager, I got into some really dark stuff in my life and I started cutting myself. And she said, I've got all these scars now down both of my arms from that season in my life. And now I've got a little girl. My little girl is getting older, and she's like, and when she said this, it dawned on me, like, I've never seen her where she wasn't wearing a long sleeve shirt. She's like, my little girl has never seen my arms if I can help it. I'm always covering them up. But she goes, I realize the day is coming when she is going to see the scars on my arm, and I'm not sure what I'm going to tell my little girl. What should I say? And I said to my friend, I said, look, what you say to your little girl is this. These scars show that I survived by the grace of God. These are scars that remind me that God's grace is bigger than all my mistakes and all my failures. These scars are covered by the scars that Jesus bore on his hands and his feet on the cross of Christ for me. And you tell your daughter, these scars mean I survived and I'm a survivor. And then I said to her, now use those scars and share your story with somebody else. There's some things you've been through in your life, and only you are the expert because you've walked through it. And for the person who's going through that, only you can speak to it. When the mass shootings happened in Florida, I was immediately on the phone with my friends who are pastors. I couldn't speak with authority to parents who've lost children, but we had people who could, and we're trying to put those people with people who had lost loved ones. But I could speak with pastors because I know what it's like to lead a church through a mass shooting and to journey through that whole experience. I don't know why we went through it. I wish we never would have gone through it. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but having gone through it, I'm not going to bury what we went through. I'm going to leverage what we went through to help somebody else who's now going through it. And that's part of the healing process. That's the power of community. So I want to thank you for being here. Across this great church's locations, watching online, I want to thank you for being a part of this community. And I want you to think long and hard. If God has rescued your life, encouraged your life, restored your life through the people of this church, give thanks to him and celebrate. Lean in and say, God, how can I give back and how can I make a difference? Make it a point to be at Celebrate Recovery or to be in group or to be in church or to give financially or to leverage your gifts or to use what God has put in your hand to help one another, because we are better together. And the only way we get through this stuff is together. In fact, Chris learned the power of together right here at Real Life. So let's check out his story now.
My name's Chris Freeman, and this is my real life story. I grew up in a very abusive home. There was a lot of verbal abuse, physical abuse, and even sexual abuse. And with that, it created a lot of turmoil inside of me. And with that, there was kind of this, the way I put it is there was like this noise that I didn't even know was there because I had it my whole life, and it just felt normal to me. When I was in high school, I took a pain pill one day in a class. When I took it, it was like this noise I had my whole life became quiet. I didn't know why, but I just knew I felt better. My story of addiction, it started off with pain pills. At some point I switched over and I ended up getting into the world of taking heroin. Heroin really brought me to a place in my life where I was hopeless. I was lonely because it took all the relationships in my life. It made me isolate so much. At the time, I really believed that there was no way I could ever be free from the drug addiction. There was a night where I was at my lowest of low, and there was something about that night that absolutely brought me to my knees. And I remember laying face first, completely flat on my carpet, and just bawling my eyes out, crying hysterically to God. And all I said was, God, please take this addiction to heroin away from me. That's all I want. And then God sent an angel in my life a couple days later in my aunt who came to my door. I ended up just breaking down and telling her, this is where I'm at, and I need help. And she said, okay, honey, we'll get through this together. And I was in an inpatient facility within the next week. When I was in rehab, they took us every Friday night to Celebrate Recovery at Saddleback Church. So Celebrate Recovery, it gives hope to people that don't have it. And really, it's more than just a program for people that struggle with drugs and alcohol. It's really for everyone. Anyone that has a hurt, habit, or hang-up can come to Celebrate Recovery and find hope and healing. CR helped me realize, one, that I'm not alone in my struggles, and two, that there is a path that God's given me if I choose to take it to get out of my old ways. So when I first got out of treatment, I knew I couldn't go back to the town I was from. There was just too much there. So when I got out here in the Santa Clara area, I looked for Celebrate Recovery and I found that there happened to be one at Real Life Church. When I found Celebrate Recovery, I had a lot of pain and I had a lot of these issues coming up, and I didn't know how to deal with it without drugs or alcohol. So I really needed a safe community to help me process what I was going through and even have a chance at staying clean and sober. So that's why I'm so thankful that I found that at Celebrate Recovery. My whole life, I've always had a problem with connection, whether that was connecting with people, with God, or with my feelings. Coming to Real Life Church it's made that connection, especially with other people, very easy. Instead of being on the outside looking in, I felt like I was a part of this group now. And because of all of that, I feel like I have a connection to God now that I've never had before. And I'm very thankful for that. God's blessed me with so much. He's blessed me with a wonderful family, a beautiful wife and daughter, a wonderful home, a job where I can pay my bills. But really it all started with that first day when I walked through the doors of Celebrate Recovery, where I found that process to be able to get from where I was then to where I am now. It's not just what God calls us to do, but it's actually really healthy for us to be in community, and it's been life-changing for me.